Hello and welcome to Unleashed. Unleashed is powered by Umbrex. You can visit us at umbrex.com/unleashed, where you can find transcripts and show notes of every episode, and also sign up for our newsletter. I'm excited to be here today with Chris Heivly, who is the founder, one of the co-founders of MapQuest, which, as you may know, sold to AOL for $1.2 billion. Chris is the author of the Build the Fort series of books. The first one was Build the Fort, Why 5 Simple Lessons You Learned as a 10-year-old Can Set You Up for Startup Success. And his second book, which we're going to focus on today, is The Startup Community Builder's Field Guide. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Will, for having me.
So let's orient folks. Just when you talk about a startup community, give us a bit of a definition there. What are we talking about?
Sure. I think, well, like a lot of things, it can mean a little bit different to everyone. But in any kind of geography, mostly defined by geography today, you're talking about a set of people involved in kind of innovative activities. So whether it's corporate innovation, whether it's investing in companies, small or big, whether it's being a founder yourself, whether you're an employee and joining a small company hoping to grow it big, and everyone in between, economic development folks, university researchers, all of these people make up a community in my mind. And we all get to use each other to the betterment of the things that we're passionate about. So regardless of what role you're playing in your city, I think there's a startup community to lean on to help you do better business.
Okay. And that was one question I had for you, which is, because I guess the assumption or the main thrust of the book is around geographically based startup communities. To what degree do you see multiple dimensions here? Are there kind of industry based startup communities where it might be the insurance industry startup community where people from across different cities would all somehow be online and going to the same conferences, and or maybe by function, like we're the IT security, cybersecurity kind of startup community. Would you say your book applies to those sorts of functional industry ones as well?
Yeah, for sure. And don't you have to today, Will? I mean, as soon as I said geographically bound, I knew that the next question we were going to talk about is, really? Does it have to be geographically bound? And obviously the answer is no. And in fact, it shouldn't today. Our networks, and in fact, a network mentality when it comes to thinking about our community is key, right? And those networks are not bound by geography anymore. So, the thing to think about is that, in trying to accomplish whatever you're trying to accomplish, and I focus more on kind of technology advances, and those can be through startups or those can be through corporate innovation. Those kind of things, you have to, if you don't rely on people outside your existing kind of geographic network, I think you're doing yourself a disfavor. So how do you effectively build those connections and make sure that not only are you a user of those connections, but you're a purveyor, right? You're connecting people on not just your behalf, but on others' behalf. And that's what makes for a great community, right? Is how tight and meaningful those connections are.
Talk to me a bit about who are the people that you're really trying to talk to, in terms of who would be the people that would be sufficiently motivated to invest significant energy in building a startup community. And maybe we talk about a geographic based one. I can kind of see a venture capitalist wanting to play that role because it's going to give them access to, deal flow. And I can kind of see someone who is employed by the city or the Regional Economic Development Council to be doing that. But otherwise, most founders are going to be focused on building their own business. And so what are the types of people that would be motivated to invest time and energy into building a startup community?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because more and more, especially if you are, let's use your example of a startup founder. I mean, you are heads down, right? I mean, if you've ever been on that journey before, you've got 100 things to do. You're lucky if you get 3 of them done today, and tomorrow it's a different set of 100, right? Because the world changes so quickly. In that kind of context, I think it's super important today in order to stay current, in order to understand, gain knowledge and traction for your idea or your company, regardless of what stage you're at. I think it's super important today that you utilize a network of people to help you make better decisions. And, especially when you're first starting out, you don't have as big a network for the thing you're working on than you will probably years later. You got to look on to venture capitalists. You got to look on economic development people. You got to look up, corporations. By the way, you know, your first investors in a company are typically almost always going to be local. Your first customers, not all the time, but typically when you're first trying to, roll out a new product, or someone that you have a close relationship with. Usually those are local, not always. As a management consultant, you get to, work freely all over the place. But, getting back to why I start a community gives you access to knowledge and potential customers and connections that help you drive whatever role you have in your endeavors. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about, all right, I'm in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina right now, and I'm thinking about, and I do some consulting here and there, and I've done it all over the world. But I'm going to tell you, the things that I learned, the things that, the juice that fills my box are things that I've figured out locally. So I would maybe take the question and run with it a little bit farther and say, I think it's important that you get involved in your local economy to make sure that it's thriving, to make sure you can help others, but also in that help, you're going to get stuff that you're going to be able to use in the rest of your business.
Okay. So I had sort of, before I picked up your book, I had kind of assumed that, other than maybe the local city economic development council, that I didn't really consider that there would be some people who were focused on building community for startups. Give us some examples of like real people, maybe that are doing this. Maybe some different, who are playing different roles. Maybe an angel investor or a VC or someone in a local kind of economic development capacity, or a banker. I don't know. Like, what are the, maybe you can mention some people's names of who are doing this.
Sure. Well, I'll take, my town of Raleigh-Durham as an example. So there's a group of 18 of us who for the last 2 years have put on a week-long kind of startup tech event, right? Called Raleigh-Durham Startup Week. So let's talk about some of those roles. Well, a couple of people are like me, right? I've been a founder, I've been an investor. I want a nice thriving community. And this is my kind of, I'm at the give back portion of my life. So that's what I'm there. We have a couple startup lawyers who work with us. What do they want? Well, they want more startups. More startups mean more potential business for them, right? They want to fill the pot, right? And make sure there's always kind of, companies to work with. We have a couple people who are, experts in marketing. Some of them work for companies, some of them work for their own kind of agencies. What do they want? They want to make sure they like to give back as well, but they're here because they want leads, and they want more thriving companies, and they want to help these companies succeed. That's a nice type of thing. We have, you mentioned, economic development folks. Well, their job is to make sure that the local economy is as robust as possible. The days of recruiting in Apple or Amazon into your city in order to make that key strategy of your economic development play, probably those are few and far between. So you better have a very kind of strong, organic, kind of natural kind of business building happening inside your community. Let me give you two more examples. Universities. Inside universities, right? They're here to talk to students and make sure students get a fantastic education. They get access to interesting experiences and opportunities so that they build successful lives. Hopefully that's their agenda, right? A certain amount of the students stay local. Some of the students are local. And so how do I make sure that when they're done, they have opportunities, companies to go to, or if they're willing to do so, start their own companies. So, you can't name an actor that's playing in the ecosystem that I can't outline reasons why they should, want to be part of a startup community, to be learning what's kind of current trends and what's, how do I apply ChatGPT to my endeavors. Typically, the startup community is full of people who are on the edge of that technology, bleeding edge, trying to figure things out. If I'm sitting in a corporation, I want to be part of this community because I'm going to see things happening that I wouldn't normally see in my old staid corporation. So let's get involved in the startup community. Maybe those people maybe I'll be a customer of theirs. Maybe they'll develop a product that I need. Maybe I'll even acquire them someday because they'll be an important part of my company's future.
Super helpful. Let's talk about it from the actual company employee slash founder perspective. Let's talk about, maybe we could kind of compare a startup that's in a place with no community or barely any. And I don't want to pick on any city, so I'm not going to name a city, but let's just imagine a remote city without a good startup scene. And we'll just pick a name in our mind for that. We'll call that Town A. And then let's talk about Raleigh, where you are and most familiar with a thriving startup scene. So if someone starts a startup in Town A versus in Raleigh, what are the sorts of benefits they're going to be able to get from being able to plug into that community? And really, what does it look like at a very tactical level? You mentioned sort of an attorney. Okay, so there's a local attorney, there's local marketing people who can help you out, there's maybe local investors who are interested in funding local startups, maybe there's talent that you can plug into. Describe a bit more, what are some of the benefits that a startup is going to have in that place that has, someone who's helped to build a community?
Yeah, well, the key is you got to go back to understanding the startup journey, what it's like to take an idea to a blank sheet of paper and figure out how to go forward, right? And in doing so, there's operational aspects, there's marketing and sales aspects, there's product development aspects, legal and financial aspects. And part of the question is, which ones do I need to care about when? I said earlier that there's 100 things. I remember my son, when I was doing a startup 15 or so years ago, he came into my office at home and said, Dad, what are you doing? And I said, well, every day there's 100 things I could be doing to advance my company forward. I'm going to write down 10 today, and if I'm lucky, I'll get 3 or 4 done. And I said, but here's the kicker. Tomorrow, it's a different 100 because something changed. So back to your question, what is the difference between Town A and Town Raleigh? Is that when I'm confounded with kind of what things to focus on, or if I need certain knowledge around a certain aspect, among any of those things, sales, marketing, strategy, operations, logistics, whatever it is that I'm kind of, challenged with it today, can I find a way to make a better decision faster than and the answer is in a robust and healthy startup community. The answer is you have a community there available to you to say, hey, can I take you to lunch? I just want to pick your brain for an hour about this topic, right? If there's no transaction, it's just, how do I help? In Town A, there's nowhere to turn, so they have to figure it out on their own, which means that takes more time and more money, which puts more pressure on the business to actually succeed. And so that's the difference between Town A and in this case, Raleigh or Austin or Seattle, or obviously New York and Boston and Silicon Valley are, old stalwarts of this startup community scene.
Okay. In a very, very, very tangible way, how does the difference manifest itself physically? So you mentioned one thing that you did. I think it was like the Raleigh Tech Week that you mentioned, or Startup Week. So that would be something where you're physically in person. There's something going on. There's people doing demo presentations, et cetera. What are the other kind of advantages of being local where there's a scene? Is it that you might be in a co-working space and there's other startups in the same building that you can chat with at the coffee machine, or you can meet people for lunch?
Yeah.
Like what physically is happening when there's a live community, as opposed to being in more of a virtual community where you could be anywhere and you can reach out to a Slack group or a forum or something and say, hey, I need a good attorney, and they connect you with someone that you never actually meet in person but you work with as an attorney for ages. So
Right.
what's that local physical advantage?
Well, I like to say that kind of mentorship or advice comes in two forms, right? There's the formal kind where I sign up for a program and I'm taught things, or someone's going to try to, find a way to get me some answers to the questions I have in a formal sense. And there's lots of programming and lots of co-working spaces and organizations, help, provide that. As importantly, if not more importantly, is what I call your kind of ad hoc advice or mentorship. And that's one, and some of that comes serendipitously, right? And you kind of referred to the company water cooler. Well, there's usually a couple community water coolers, right, where it's a coffee shop or it's an event or an activity where you run into people. We don't exactly know what's going to happen, but I call them serendipitous sparks. But like, you're sitting there, you're having a beer, having a coffee, maybe hopefully the beer's at the end of the day, the coffee's at the beginning of the day, and start chatting with someone. And if you created the conditions in your community for these collisions to occur, and meaningfulness can come out of that, like, hey, and maybe something like, hey, I did logistics for 25 years. Like, let me you know let me give you an hour and see if I can help you on your way. Or maybe I can introduce you to someone that's around the corner. Or, do you know Joe over in the corner here? You should probably talk to him about this thing. The meaningfulness of connections is a little bit more, let's be honest, it's a little easier when it's in person and a little bit harder when it's virtual. We have to work harder to build the meaningfulness where I'm willing to say, hey, I see you standing there, or someone introduced us, right? So that's what the in-person gives you over the virtual. Obviously, you need to do both today.
What are the virtual water coolers in Raleigh, or the actual water coolers? What are the coffee shops or the bars, or the parks or the gyms that people go to in the startup scene in Raleigh?
Yeah, it's a funny question because about 12, 13 years ago, when I first started on this journey of seeing what I could do in my newly adopted town of Raleigh, Durham, I wanted to meet as many people as possible. So I did about 275 coffee meetings, I called them coffee, lunch, or end of day frosty beverage meetings. And I did 5 or 6 a day. I ended up taking Fridays off because Friday was kind of like figure out what I just done the last 4 days. Because you imagine networking with 25 to 26 people over 4 days, and then now you have to remember what happened and what my follow-ups are and all that kind of stuff. But I don't drink coffee, but I was in every coffee shop in Raleigh, Durham, every single one. But we all know in our town, there's a couple places where, our tribe kind of hangs out. In Durham, it initially was BU Cafe. Now Durham has exploded, so there's 4 or 5 places. Um, a group called the American Underground, which is a co-working space, has a happy hour once a month, open to everyone, not just members of the co-working space. People come in, get a free beer, kind of hang out. Down in Raleigh, there's an equivalent of Raleigh Founded, and their whole, and usually these places are pretty open, right? Like, they're not, it's not like trying to go into a corporation. I'm trying to think, a Regis, right? It's not like a Regis where people are just interested in the offices. They're interested in the camaraderie. They're interested in the collisions. And so there's usually lots of quote unquote events and activities, formal or informal, just to help people jam together. Smaller places don't have them, but I'm telling you, there's not probably even a city that's over 250,000 in population that doesn't have at least one or two of these places, including the coffee shop.
You mentioned activities, and I'm particularly interested in this, given my role with Umbrex, where we organize a bunch of online as well as in-person events. What have you found in your years doing this and coaching, startup community builders? What kind of events or activities have you found really work well to build community? So, like, kind of the basic is you say, okay, we're going to have a mixer and people can show up, or a happy hour, like you mentioned. Talk to me about the different genres. Maybe there's a event that's specifically on some topic where there might be some training, or you might be some doing, or a hackathon, or round table networking. There's all
Right.
these different, right, demo days. What are some of the activities that you see in the different genres, and what's your perspective on the kind of best use cases for those different kinds of things?
It's a great question, and like a good politician, I'm going to answer, kind of in a slightly different way. But I'm going to go to the end of your question and then work back. So the interesting thing, Will, is that every city's a little different. Every community's a little different. They have their personality, their culture. And so, as I've done this consulting all over the world, it's first of all finding what the culture is. For instance, what I found in Louisville, Kentucky is they liked morning meetings and hated happy hours. Um, uh, or vice versa. Like maybe it was vice versa. Maybe they liked afternoons but not mornings, and Buffalo liked mornings but not afternoons, or something. So every community has its own little personality, and so the right, when you hold the events and how you bring people together can be more or less effective in those areas. But you got to experiment and try things, and then figure out what your community wants. Um, I'm a big fan of leadership comes in whatever you're motivated by. So I was talking to a woman this week who is kind of new to the Raleigh Durham area, and she talked about. Turns out maybe that was last week, but turns out she was interested. She was very new to the area, and she's very interested in kind of women entrepreneurs. And I said, fantastic. I know that there's a monthly invitee only small dinner thing that 6 or 7 women entrepreneurs get together, and they just kind of a safe space, and they just talk about their businesses. Let me introduce you. Maybe that's for you. Hey, maybe you want to play leader and your experience is more in tech. So let's start a woman in tech meetup. And by we, I mean you, because I'm not a woman. So, how can I support you on that? How can I send that out to, how can I introduce you to 5 or 10 people that might be the initial attendees, and have you get started? So I like to think that these activities are best when they bubble up from the bottom, when people kind of grab one of those and say, hey, I'm motivated to do this because I'm a woman or a woman in tech, or, I really like beer socials or whatever it is. Let's figure out, like, you go, kind of grab the football and start running with it. Let me know how I can support you. Maybe the only thing I support you is I make 10 introductions. Maybe I use my email list. Maybe I use Twitter or whatever. I'll help, you kind of generate some excitement, and we can get 4 or 5 other people to do that. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, but to me, that's what it has to be. It has to be kind of like grassroots up, not kind of like, intellectually, go kiss a ring of someone who gives me permission to go do something.
Right. Because, your book is the Startup Community Builders Field Guide, and I think you make the point in the book that no one is going to be the builder for a given city, right? It's like no matter where you go, there's probably already something already happening. No one is going to appoint you the builder, so you can just go and sort of start adding to what already exists in some way, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would hope that every one of us as kind of professionals and, passionate, hardworking individuals, that we look for ways to help our local community. And what I'm saying is, that could be from, running the Little League, team or coach, or maybe getting involved in the arts or something like that. Those are great things too. But, your kind of entrepreneur community is just as important. And in fact, the economic impacts can be, really huge for not just you or your business, but also the businesses that you consult with. So to that end, what I'm telling you is that it's pretty easy to come in and pretty easy to find. Now, you could be one of these people that go, I know exactly what we need. I want to try this out. And what I go through in the book is great. Go find 4 or 5 people to help you with your, idea and activity, help stand it up in some form or fashion, and, go on your own. Or maybe you see something that you say, hey, this thing's been running. This thing's pretty good. Maybe I can add a little spin to it, and you can augment the current activity. Lots of different ways to kind of engage. And what I say is just start talking to a bunch of people, and then I think the thing that you want to do will naturally bubble up. And then, part 5 of building the fort is just go build the darn fort.
So your book is broadly applicable beyond people that, beyond just the the idea of startup communities, it's really applicable to all sorts of communities. Maybe someone who wants to build a bit more community on their neighborhood block and organize a Halloween parade or something. I liked your framework of the 4 stages of ecosystem maturity. Could you walk us through that framework?
Yeah, so I have to qualify this by saying when I talk about different levels of how mature your ecosystem is, it's not in a compare game, which is a really exercise that's just not useful to anybody. It's more to understand the things you should prioritize for your community at different stages of maturity. So obviously what's happening in Raleigh Durham, and we've been at it 15 years, and there was a base of assets and things going on in RTP way before I even showed up. But I also have to be working in Columbia, South Carolina, which is probably 15 to 20 years behind Raleigh. So the things that we should do in Raleigh are different than the things we should do in Columbia, and vice versa. So the important part about identifying and doing this kind of like little personal audit of what's happening is to prioritize kind of the things you need to do to move forward. Not unlike when you're building a business, right? The things you do at the idea stage are different than the things you do when it's a $100 million revenue company with 400 employees, right? So that's the reason for these 4 stages of maturity: nascent, developing, emerging, and then leading.
I was also wondering, you mentioned assets earlier, and you have this nice framework for assets. It's actors, activities, and attitudes. I love the 3 A's.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that framework and how we can use that.
Well, we're never tired of a little alliteration, right, to help you sell something. So what I find in a lot of places is that from an actor point of view, that we don't make this as kind of widespread and as inviting as we should. So part of the actors idea is that each one, and we've talked about them already, right? We've talked about economic development people and bureaucrats and university people and corporate members and founders and investors and and everyone in between. So one is to make sure that you've set up kind of a more inclusive atmosphere for all the actors to play a role. Why wouldn't you, right? Everyone has an expertise to share. The activities we've talked about, Will, and those kind of differ from community to community and may differ based on the maturity of your ecosystem. All that saying, the third and the most forgotten place is, how are we going to do this? What are our attitudes and behaviors and actions that we're going to put in play? And this is the one thing that really separates mature ecosystems from immature ecosystems, is that they don't have enough of a collaborative, supportive, inclusive type of mindset. And each one of us individually can do a better job of doing that. And I'll give you one simple little task. Everyone asks me, okay, Chris, but what can I do tomorrow to help my community? I said, how about introduce 2 people together from your network that don't know each other with no expectation of what they're going to get out of it? And why don't you do a couple of those a day and do those a couple days a week? And why don't you get your friends to do the same thing? Because if you remember when we led off, we talked about connectivity. We talked about networks, right? Virtual or physical, local or not. I believe that your success as an individual or as a company, as a consultant, as a company builder, as an investor, everything you do will become more successful if you have a really active network that you can lean on. And so that network goes back to the attitudes that you bring to this. Are we going to collaborate? Or do I look at everything as a transaction and a zero-sum game? Those are the things that are friction points to the growth of community. So I'm glad you asked about that framework. But just think about what your mindset is going in. And hopefully I really go into a lot of detail about how to maybe shift your mindset to what we call more of a give first mentality, which we give to someone without any expectation of getting something back in return.
Yeah, talk about that. Talk about that transition and about the give first mentality.
Yeah, I mean, it's key. I mean, so I'll tell you a little story. So it's 2009 and 10, and I'm running around doing these 275 connections in about 5 months. And at the end of every one of those connections, I just ask a simple question: what can I do for you? And they said, no, I'm going to, no, really. What keeps you up at night? What are your challenges? Because maybe I can help. Maybe not personally, but maybe I know someone that could help, right? So I do this over and over and over again. The 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 point of that is that never once did I ask to be paid. Sorry, you know what? I lost your question.
But you're doing great. I love the story. Keep going. We can get back to the question. Go tell the
Yeah.
story.
So, you know, what's I remember at one point my wife said, like, so what are you doing? You're buying all these people coffee and you're listening to to what they're doing. And I said, I don't know exactly where this is going to come, but I know that at the end, I know that people are going to feel like I can help them. I will build trust between them individually. By the way, fast forward, I probably have sat down with about 4,000 people just in Raleigh, Durham. So the idea here is that it's a little tough at first because you're kind of going like, what's in it for me? But the transition that I really will I wished I knew this younger. I'm 63. I wish I knew this when I was in my 20s and 30s. I would have gotten so much more done faster, because what I can tell you is that when I push something out and say, hey, to this group of people that I've helped and done things for, and they've done things for me. When I say, hey, listen, I'm writing a book. Would you mind pushing it, in your circles? No problem, people say. Hey, I'm starting up this new event, Raleigh Durham Startup Week. I'd love to have you come as a speaker. Happy to do so, right? So the things that I end up wanting to do now, 15 years later almost, I have this network of people that I can activate when I need something, all because I've kind of already pre-invested with each one of those individually.
I love that. I'm so aligned with that. You're like the master connector of Raleigh. 4,000 is a lot of coffees. Um, so I have a bunch of questions about this. One is, and were you this was all happening after you had sold MapQuest. So I mean, you were, someone to, people would want to know, right?
I have a good story, yes.
Um,
a, a good MapQuest story, a good exit event that sounds
yeah.
really super sexy.
Yeah, it sounds super sexy, right? Yeah, okay, I'll meet the co-founder of MapQuest. Yeah, sure. Um, One practical question is, you met 4,000 people, 275 in those first few months. Um, how are you keeping track of all of your notes from those meetings? What system are you using? Excel, a Google Sheet, a piece of paper, your just your brain, a CRM system?
Yeah, F, all the above. G, not very well. In the beginning, it was an Excel spreadsheet, maybe through the first 1,000. Then I abandoned that. I've tried CRMs in the past. It's some combination of, brain today. Obviously, I do have a little bit of a tagging system in Google Contacts,
Mm.
but, you know, the key is that people are going to fade in and out of your life. And I don't need to super keep track of it. This isn't like a database kind of thing that I have to activate per se. Um, but what's amazing is so one of the key little things that I do, and I've done it for over 10 years now, is I have open office hours. So you go to my website at www.heivly.com, and you'll see kind of, connect with me, and anybody can sign up for 20 minutes. I do a couple hours a week, every week. And I never know who's going to walk in the door, Will. And the virtual door, by the way, they're all Zoom now. And I never know. And they're from all over the world. They're someone who found something or saw me speak, on stage. And I mentioned the same thing I just mentioned to your audience. And for 20 minutes, we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. Now, obviously, at my advanced age and all of those contacts later, I don't remember everyone. But I'm going to tell you, if someone jumps on or I run into them, at a meetup or something, and they say, "Yeah, we've met," I said, they don't have to get more than 4 or 5 words in, and you go, "Oh yeah, I remember us talking about that. How's that going?" My demeanor never changes. Obviously, I don't have strong connections with 4,000. What's the notion is what you can have about 150 close people and about 50 super close people in your life. There's some research on that.
Dunbar number, weak ties. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what? I can turn any one of those on whenever I need it.
Hmm.
So
What's the change that you're trying to create in the world?
what's the change? Um, that you can just accomplish so much more by not going solo. I think I've wasted years of my effort, heads down, back in my, basement, or even in the companies that I was running, sitting in my office. And I just want to tell people, like, get the heck out of your office, go talk to people, go connect with people, do it parts of every week, if not a couple times a week, and come in with this give first, and the rewards that you will reap are tremendous. Now, I happen to care most about founders because I think more successful founders in our communities make our cities more robust and a place where people want to come into and do good things, and property values hold or rise, and right, governments are happy because the revenues are good. Those are the places I want to live in, and so that's why I do it and what I'm hoping to accomplish.
I love that purpose. I love that. So, and I love that you have these office hours. I got to introduce you to Paul Millard. You guys are kindred souls. Paul does a similar thing. He has open problem solving sessions. I think, and he's met people all over the world as well.
Yeah,
Um,
please do. They're amazing, by the way. I said I have no idea who walks through. I've met people of all different countries, different ages, and I get a little something out of it. Now I'm smarter because of them, right? Because of the 20 minutes of what they share. So why not?
Share with us one or two stories of connections that you've made for people where you connected kind of person X to person Y and help, made a mutually beneficial connection. I'd love to hear some success stories.
Oh, geez. Yeah. I mean, it's the perfect question. And now I have to, um,
Because
let me
if you
think.
know 4,000 people, when I was in high
Well, it's more
school,
like 9,000 people now.
well, nine, and you've even just the people that you've met, the 4,000.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, I would have been able to calculate how many possible different connections you could make out of those. I think it's 4,000 plus 1 divided by 2 times 4,000, perhaps, something like that. It's a lot
Yeah.
because it's like 4,000, it's like 3,999 plus 3,999. Anyway, you've had a lot of possible connections. I'm sure that, that there's been some really amazing stories where you connected an investor to a founder, or a founder to a potential client, or a founder to a potential, like, co-founder.
Yes. Yeah. And maybe before hopefully have one of these bubble up, because the question is perfect, except that I would say there's a nuance implied in here, in that something amazingly magical happened out of that one little connection. And what I find is success is through 1,000 of those things,
Mm.
right? The whole riff on death by 1,000 cuts. Well, maybe the other, I say, success through 1,000 nudges. I never know. I make probably, 100 connections a month, right? 2 or 3 a day, a couple days a week, whatever, more as needed when asked. But what I want to tell you is I don't even know what happened with 99% of those.
Right.
I trust that the universe is going to conspire, that some of those are going to be unbelievable sparks. I may not know that that was my spark that happened to do that. I don't really care. I just want to give the opportunity for that spark to happen. And so, I'm always introducing founders to investors. I'm always introducing investors. What investors care about? They care about deal flow.
Mm-hmm.
So the more I introduce them to potential founders, I don't know which ones are going to like their fire or not. If I overly curate that, I'm going to miss most of the sparks because I
Mm.
can't predict where the sparks are going to come from.
Now,
So you really need to not have a scarcity mindset or an engineering mindset. You have to have kind of a universe mindset. Um, you asked for a story. I'm going to twist the story around to something. I'm going to tell my own story.
all right.
So, in our world of technology-based startups. There's a group called TechStars out of Boulder. They're the big dogs in the country, right? They run these accelerator/incubator programs. They're the big dog. They're really well known. If you're a startup technology maven, you know who TechStars is. And two of their four founders, I had met in 2009. I asked them how to, what was it like? How did they do Boulder, which is an unbelievably innovative, tiny, but punches way above its weight kind of city. I said, how did you guys do it? And they gave me a bunch of advice, and I stayed in touch for years. Well, one of them, Brad Feld, has written 8 or 9 books, and someone I really look up to. And so I stayed in touch every so often. Loved your post. You read your book. Hey, by the way, we just reached our 30th investment. Blah blah blah. Sharing my news, complimenting them on their news, and just staying connected. And in 2017, when my incubator, we were kind of moving on from our accelerator incubator, I reached out to those guys and I said, listen, I'm ready to do something new. I don't know if you guys would consider kind of moving to, opening up, they've opened up, 50 places around the world, consider Raleigh, Durham, right? Here I am pitching my city. And they're like, hey, why don't you come out to Boulder and hang out with us for a day and we'll show you, we'll talk about what we're doing. And at the end of the day, for the first time in 20 years, this is back in 2017, I call my wife and I go, I think I just took a job. And the thing is, the three of us decided that we were going to build a consulting company around how to build startup communities all over the world. To be able to work with people that you've so thoroughly respected and kind of maybe not put on a pedestal, that sounds actually kind of negative, but you hold in high esteem. And for them to say, hey, let's work on something together, all came because we connected, we stayed in a meaningful connection, we complimented each other, we questioned, we used each other when needed. And then when serendipity called to say, hey, I'm in between things and I want to help some communities in North Carolina, and they're like, we want to help some communities in the world. Do you want to work on this together? And you're the people you aspire to be more like, say, you want to work together. You're like, heck yeah, let's do that. And so all of that came from building good connections, connecting with people, and then supporting each other's efforts.
Amazing. I love that story. I want to ask you about MapQuest. And after you sold MapQuest, this is a little bit off the topic community, but just to dial back, and I'm so curious.
Yeah.
After selling MapQuest, I imagine that you had, some kind of payout as a start, and as one of the co-founders. How did you, you're probably working kind of 100 miles an hour, right, to build this company, and then you sold it. What happened to you afterwards? What was your decision process around what am I going to do next in life? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, well, we're all kind of a little weird, right? We all are driven by different things, and I don't sit still very well. So, after my immediately leaving MapQuest, I decided. So I jokingly say, Will, that I have career ADD. So, I shifted gears and wanted to become. I helped our largest funder in MapQuest. I came and ran a corporate venture fund for them, right? And sorry, I'm gonna go find a quiet area because the lawnmowers are now here.
Which I cannot hear, by the way, so it's not
Okay.
It's not showing up on the audio.
Good to know. So I went to run a corporate venture fund, and this is the late 90s, and learn how to, invest at scale and learn how to choose investments and figure out, which companies are worth investing in and which are worth skipping. So, that was something new. It's a whole new language, a whole new way of doing, being involved in kind of a community from an investor point of view. So I did that for a while. And then after 3 or 4 years, I realized that I missed, the operating of a company. And so for probably 10 years after that, I was the guy that an investor would parachute into a stuck company and say, hey, can you fix this? And these companies were, as small as $1 million in revenue and as big as 150 million in revenue. I would take some, executive position from some smaller ones, probably more CEO, and others were more like GM a division, and say, hey, could you go fix this for us? It fueled my ADD perfectly because, not unlike, many of your listeners, one of the reasons we do management consulting is we got lots of different clients and we get a different problem every day or week or month, right, to help solve. And so I enjoyed that from that point of view. And then, eventually I started hearing about these new age incubators and was in my new home of Raleigh, Durham, where I decided that I wanted to really make something happen for my community, which is when, the last 10, 12 years really into that community point of view.
Amazing. So,
And I'm
Chris,
sure now it's book writing.
it's book
So,
writing, the Build the Fort series. So again, the title is Build the Fort: The Startup Community Builders Field Guide. We will include a link to that in the show notes. And Chris, share again. We'll include, Heivly.com. Is that the best place for listeners that want to maybe book a meeting with you and do a office hours discussion? Any other links that you'd want to share?
yeah, I can share my email, Chris at buildthefort.com.
Fantastic.
And think about this. I mean, your actions have to support your thoughts. Here I am. I just gave my website, my email, and I have opened office hours. This is how you live the things that I just talked about, right?
You
Make
are
yourself
role
available.
modeling it, Chris. You are out there. You are living the community builder. And we'll include Heivly.com and those in the show notes. Chris, it's been amazing having this discussion with you. I picked up some great tips for my own community, and I'm really thrilled to meet you and to hear what you've been building. It's incredible. Thank you very much for joining.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And if there's anything I can do for you, don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you very much.